I've been looking everywhere to find a perfect quilt to piece on the Baby Lock Celebrate and to show you how to do quilt piecing on a serger. Thanks to Michelle, I think I've found the perfect one. I'm Kathy, and this is Sewing Tech Talk. So the giveaway for today's video is a great pack of thread. Every time you like, share, or comment, you're entered for a chance to win. I have been looking high and low for the perfect quilt to piece on the Baby Lock Celebrate serger.
Hey Kathy, it's another crazy crossover event. This one featuring the Twister ruler. Now I've got so much to show everyone on More Sewing with Michele. So check it out and you will see how I take this ruler and I make a traditional quilt block piece together, unlike what Kathy did, where Kathy did it on her serger. So this way you'll have both ways to choose from. So I'm going to go in detail, the cutting, talk about it. There's so much to discuss. So Kathy, back to you so you can get to threading your serger.
Now, you can piece a lot of different quilts on the serger, but I wanted to find one that looked a little bit more complicated, but it was super easy to do. And thank you, Michele, for turning me on to the Twister pinwheel quilt, and that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today. Now, you use 10-inch squares, and this is a super fast quilt, and most quilts that you make on the serger are going to be quick quilts. You have had that situation. You need a quilt top fast. This is the perfect solution, my friends, because you use a charm square to make this. Of course, you could cut your own 10-inch squares, but the advantage of not a charm, this is a layer cake. Leave it to quilters to name something after food. But this is a collection of all different fabrics, and you are buying just the pre-cut 10-inch squares. So you already have a head start in putting this together. Now I'm also going to show you a disappearing 4-patch which uses charm squares, and those are these 5-inch squares that you can also buy in a pack. Of course you can cut your own, but this is a great way to get super fast start on putting your quilt together. Now when you're using thread for your serger, we're going to be using a 3-thread narrow stitch that's a perfect 1/4-inch seam. So you will need 3 spools of thread. They don't have to necessarily match, and they don't have to match the fabric. You're going to either use a light for light fabrics. I use a gray generally, so 3 spools of light gray thread's a perfect solution. Or if it's a mostly dark quilt, then you can use a dark color. You'll need 3 spools of that. I'm going to use the standard foot for piecing, but there are specialty feet that are available for you to help you get that perfect 1/4-inch seam, because we're not going to be cutting off a whole lot from our fabric. And you might want a trim bin. If you're going to make this quilt, you're going to definitely need get the Twister ruler. And that's pretty much it. Let's get the machine set up so that we can do some quilt piecing. Now, this quilt, it starts out with 10-inch squares, and we're just going to sew them together in a big old checkerboard. But we need that 1/4-inch seam. I do like this quilt because it's kind of tolerant if your seams are a little different than a 1/4-inch, and there's not a whole lot of matching of the angles when you put it together. So that's why I think this is a great quilt to put together on a serger. Let's get that serger set up. First, we have to thread it. So when we come up to the Celebrate serger, it is a Baby Lock self-threading serger. So what I'm going to do is open up the door, and I'm going to take the threads and I'm going to thread my loopers by sticking them in the threading ports. Now I want to tell the serger that I want to thread, so I'm going to press in this button, turn the knob on the side, and it's going to find its happy place and everything's going to lock in. And you can tell you've done that with a click. I'm going to thread the upper looper. Simply take the thread, put it in the threading port, push the lever, and the thread goes through. If you didn't stick up, it came right up in here. Hope you can see that. It's light gray thread because it was a little bit challenging to see. Now, here is my lower looper. I simply take the end, stick it into the threading port. Now on this serger, I need to tell it which threading port I'm using. Some of them you don't. I'm going to click this over, push the lever, and it's threaded faster than you can say, I wish I could thread my serger. Now what I want to do is thread the needle. This serger happens to have tension dials, and they're all set on the basic 4. You can tell that's just the average or normal because it has a dark box around it. There's no specialty adjustments for this stitch really. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to release those threading loopers. Turn this on the side. There's a little knob on the knob on the side. There's 2 little green marks that you want to align. I'm going to thread the right hand needle, and we will be using the right hand needle to do this narrow 3-thread overlock. I'm going to bring the needle threader down. Needle threader works really fast and really great and really easy. Now to set this machine up, basically, I'm going to change the adjustment of the blade, which is right here. I don't want to cut a whole bunch off of my fabric because that would change the size of the patch, but I am going to turn it so that it is set at a 5.0, which is that smaller number right down here. That gives me 5 millimeters from the right hand needle to the blade, and that's pretty much close to a perfect 1/4 inch seam. When I'm talking about stitch length, which is the large lower knob, I can adjust it. I think a couple clicks over 2 is just about right. Now I can turn that blade off or have it cut, and I'm going to trim just a tiny little bit off of the edge of my patches. But if you're uncomfortable with that, you can lock the blade and just use it kind of as a seam guide. That's pretty much it. I'm going to close it on up. Find my patches, and we're going to sew them together. Oh, and you might want to you can get a snap-on trim bin for your machine, or you can get a trim bin that sits below, because you will be cutting off some small little hairs. Okay, so here's my squares. I've started to sew my squares together, and these are the 10-inch squares. Now what I'm going to do, this quilt looks the best if you have like a light, dark, light, dark. So I'm simply going to put my edges together, my raw edges together, and we're just going to seam them. Now, I'm going to lower my presser foot. The great thing about a serger, it has feed dogs all the way that come up to the front of the foot. And I know I'm going to cut off just a little bit using that blade. So I'm going to align my fabric so that it is just, I can visually see where that blade is. So all I have to do is press the power pedal and get started. I don't really have to do a test on this serger because it's a Baby Luck serger. It sews the perfect stitch first time every time, just saying. So here we go. We're going to stitch along, and we're actually piecing with our 1/4 inch stitch right now. Notice I'm not cutting off very much. If I am, just a little teeny tiny bit of this pinking on the edge of the patches. Now this quilt is a very forgiving quilt. So if this wasn't a 1/4 inch, but it is, but if it wasn't a 1/4 inch seam, it'd be okay for this quilt. So there is my seam. What I'm going to do for this particular quilt is I'm going to sew a whole bunch of squares together. So you can see I've started. I have light, dark, light, dark. The instructions for this quilt are not in your handout. They do come with a ruler. So to make this particular quilt, you will need the ruler anyway. But I want to show you another quilt that's called a disappearing 4-patch. And that basically is just squares that you've sewn together in groups of 4. Kind of looks like a light, dark, light, dark. So it looks just like this. And this is basically what's called a 4-patch in the world of quilting. What we're going to do is we're going to cut these apart and then sew them back together to make a more intricate design. And we're going to do that with this quilt as well. So I hope you believe that sewing with quilt piecing with a serger is super fast. In fact, I want to thank Michele again for showing me that this ruler is the best. Actually on this one, this was all pieced on the serger, and it was the perfect place to put a little bit of embroidery too. So it's the perfect baby quilt. So Michele, I want to thank you very much. In fact, you want to see my quilt? Here, I'm going to send it off to you so that you can see how cool it is to piece a quilt with a serger. So Michele, I know that you're going to show everyone how to put that together using a sewing machine, but let's talk a little bit. I know you're showing people how to cut it as well. But remember, this isn't the only quilt that you can put together on a serger. It just happens to be a really cool one. So thank you again, Michele. I mean, this is going to be so much fun. So what we do to make this quilt, and once again, the instructions come with the ruler. Now, but in your handout, you may not have it, and you may want to follow the handout a little bit better. So on the handout, I just have just a picture from the instructions to give you some idea how I'm going to be cutting this. So you're going to get complete instructions with the ruler, but just be aware that that's there. Also in your handout, I talk about all the setup that I just did on the serger to get ready to do those 1/4-inch seams, and there's other fun stuff that you can use also for piecing. You can piece with a flat lock stitch, and if you had a machine that does a chain stitch, you can piece with that as well. So the handout might be something that's kind of useful. So now, what we did is I put this quilt together. This one was put together on the serger, and the little one that I showed Michele, that one's put together on the serger as well. The one behind me with these big old squares, I sewed that on the sewing machine because I know I say you can do it faster on the serger, but I wanted to prove it to myself. So when I sewed this one together, same exact size, this went together, my friends, in 1/3 of the time to get to this stage here. And putting it together after I get the pieces cut, I know it's going to go just as fast. So what we need to do is we need to, after this is cut, after this is all put together, the squares are put together, you put a border around the outside edge. That's in your instructions. And then you cut the squares out using the ruler. Now, the ruler has lines imprinted on it, and what you do is you align those up with the seams on your piecing that you've already done, and you take your cutter and you're cutting the patches out. Now, what happens is you're cutting them out on the diagonal, which means that these edges right here are going to be bias edges. Now, on the sewing machine, it does go together, but one thing that the serger excels at is putting together bias edges without them getting stretched or ripply. Because the serger has a differential feed, you can adjust it so that when I'm putting these together, which I'm going to do after I get everything cut out here, then, oh my gosh, it goes together so well, and it controls that bias edge. So now let's cut our squares apart. Now what you do is you get your whole quilt top. This is going to take a little bit of time because you're going to be doing some cutting, and you might want to treat yourself if you haven't changed the blade in your rotary cutter in a while. You might want to change the blade in your rotary cutter. Treat yourself to a fresh blade. So basically, what you do is you line up this line on the ruler with your seam. Here's the border, the dark border that I have going around the outside edge. You take it. Now, when I cut, I'm not going to cut all the way going across because I'm going to cut into a patch that's going to be cut out soon. So what I do is I take my ruler, lay it down on that edge, push it gently along, and when I stop, I go just a tiny little bit beyond. Now, hopefully I've done everything. Sometimes you might have a little corner that you've been a little bit too cautious on. Then I take my little scissors, I do a little snip in there, and I end up with a really cool patch. When these are all cut and put together, when you sew them together, what's going to happen is you get that great pinwheel shape. So when you cut out your patches, you're going to want to keep them kind of in some sort of an order. In fact, I just cut a row at a time and I piece it, and then I cut the next row and then I piece it, because it just keeps it in order for me. Now I promise that I'm going to show you that disappearing four patch. So let me grab one of those squares. And this is one, there's tons of instructions for this even on the internet. There's all kinds of disappearing quilts. There's a disappearing four patch, a disappearing 9 patch, a disappearing hourglass, tons of different disappearing quilts, and they all work great on the serger. So just a thought, go out there or look through your quilt patterns, because you may have something that's perfect for piecing on your serger. So how does this work? Just a quick visual. So I did my 4 patch, and what I did is I'm going to cut this 4 patch apart. I've already started, so let me show you what that looks like. So here's my little tray that I have my pieces on, and what I did is I took the ruler and I cut 1 inch on either side of those center seams. So that kind of looks something like this. I'm not going to cut through this other one, but I can give you a visual. So that looks like You lay the 1-inch mark on that center seam, and then you cut and you cut and you cut and you cut, and you end up with this. Now, why is it a disappearing 4 patch? Because once you get it cut apart, then you shuffle all the pieces around. So this one could go here, this one goes there, this one goes here, this one goes here, and you can take this and give it a turn. And look at, you've created a completely different look. Of course, you know I sewed one together to show you. Now I took my pieces and I just moved them all the way around. Look how much fun that is. Now on the serger, I do have some slightly bulkier seams, and so why is this, just going to be careful when you cut it apart. You don't want your ruler to rock, and I'm going to literally just wiggle match them when we get over to the serger, which I'm going to go to right now. So pretty cool, right? So this is a disappearing 4 patch. Pretty simple to do. In fact, this cut right here could be anything that I want it to be. So I hope you enjoyed the fact that we can piece it really fast. We'll cut it apart and we sew it back together. It looks like we were the world's fastest stitcher, right? So here we go. Now let's go. I'm going to cut some pieces apart and I'm going to meet you over there at the serger, and we're going to sew our pieces together and we'll be almost done with our quilt top. So I'll see you soon. Let me cut some pieces and I'll meet you over the serger. So I cut out a row, and here's what they look like when you get them cut out, and you can start to see that pinwheel forming. Okay, and why is this really good on the serger? Well, this seam and this seam don't necessarily match over the whole quilt. All you're doing is matching these corners when you come up to them. So even though the serger seam is a little bit bulkier than a regular seam, I don't really have to worry about it when I come across. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay these right sides together, and if I want to, I can put a little clip on here just to hold them, just to make sure that I'm coming to my end correctly. Now the serger's all set up for a 1/4-inch seam, but we're going to have this bias here, so I want to show you one thing, a couple things on the serger that can kind of help you just to make sure that these lay nice and flat. So let's look at the serger, and here on the serger there's a couple things that I wanted to point out. A serger does have a differential feed, and that means when I take this little lever here and I go a click up from neutral, normal, no gather, come up just a tiny little bit, what that does is that's going to gently keep that bias from stretching out. Another thing I can do is up here on this serger, on some sergers it's over here, on some of the other baby lock sergers, I have this is the pressure on the foot, and I can lighten that up just a little bit by turning it over to the left, and that means that there's less pressure pushing down on that foot, so that everything's going to come out just so. Now let's do this one, and then I'll show you how to match seams on that disappearing 4 patch. You know, lower our presser foot, get ready to go. Remember, I'm just barely kissing that edge with that knife. Perfect. And here's our first 2 patches. Pretty neat, right? Okay, now let me show you that disappearing 4 patch. And that disappearing 4 patch has some pieces that I'm going to put together. Here it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to piece these. I'm going to come along here, sew that. I'm going to come along here and sew that, and then I'll sew coming in this direction, and my whole block will be put together. So I kind of lay them out on a tray. I take them up and I take them 2 pieces at a time. I fold them right sides together, and what I'll be doing is some sort of kind of form of string piecing. So let's sew these. Now when it comes to the very tip of my foot up here, I'm going to grab my next 2 pieces, and this is what I really wanted to show you. I want to sew these. Well, be careful, don't unorientate them when you do it. So I want to sew these so that I have this seam and this seam like wiggle matched. So I'm going to put them together, and this seam's going to go this direction and this seam's going to go this direction, and when I sew across here, it's going to meet perfectly right in the middle. And I'm going to feed it in right away to here, and then it'll be all held together for me. If you want to, you can take a little, probably a wooden skewer would be the best. You can put it out over here, hold it here, keep those 2 pieces together as you're coming up to them. Let's grab our next two. Oh my gosh, I'm behind. Here we go. Put these two together. Sew these two together. So they're held together. All I have to do is come along and sew the other piece, and I have everything all set to go. In fact, I do this with most of my pieces when I'm making a quilt, and then I come on in and it's a leisurely activity to sew them together going the other way. So piecing on a serger is pretty simple. You know that you only cut off that little teeny tiny bit. There are some feet that you can get that kind of help you. Let me show you a couple of those. There is the lace applicator foot and the blind hem foot. And if you look at this foot, this is the lace applicator foot. This is the one for the Baby Lock 8-thread serger, and it has a guide right here. And what you're going to do is adjust this, and your edge of your fabric flows right along in here, and you can absolutely perfectly adjust it so that it's a 1/4 inch in, and it shows you there's the needle position right there. So it's going to show you that you can even measure that and know that you're a 1/4 inch away. That's pretty cool. Now this is the blind hem foot. It also has a physical guide, and your fabric's going to come under here through like this, and you can adjust it so that it gives you that perfect 1/4 inch. So this is the blind hem foot. This is the lace applicator foot. You can get them for either your Baby Lock 8-thread serger. Now they're different for like the Baby Lock Celebrate or any of the 4-thread sergers. So make sure you're getting the right one if you're going to add a foot to your collection. So I talk about those in the handout. There's also a fabric guide that you can get for those 8-thread sergers. Talks about that in your handout. In fact, setting up the serger is in there as well. And then just the basic what you need for the twister quilt so that you can get started while you're waiting for your ruler to come.
So Cathy, it's been a great episode of the Crazy Crossover event with more Sewing with Michele and Tech Talk. So don't forget, you can pick up this handy dandy ruler featured on both episodes at moors-sew.com. Or you have the option of clicking on the link in both Tech Talk and More Sewing with Michele. Either way, you're going to want to get this ruler so you can create the wonderful things we've shown you today. Take care, everyone, and Cathy, back to you.
So I hope you enjoyed quilt piecing on the Baby Lock Celebrate serger. There's a lot of stuff you can do on a serger. It's not just for making garments. You can do a ton of stuff. And quilt piecing, it's just quick, fast, and easy on a Baby Lock Celebrate serger or any one of the Baby Lock self-threading serger lines. So get piecing, get those quilt tops out, get that fabric out of your stash and start putting it together, because you are going to want to do a lot of piecing using a serger. I'm going to send it over to George. He's going to tell you a little bit more about the Celebrate, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for joining me, and thank you, Michele, again, because I'm going to have so many twister quilts. I don't even know if I should thank you or not. Off to George.
Thanks, Cathy. Once again, that was an incredible presentation. Don't forget to click on the link and download the notes for Sewing Tech Talk with Cathy. Now, Baby Lock invented the serger back in 1967, and throughout the years they've had many innovations that have separated them from all others. The Baby Lock Celebrate is one of their most popular models. It has their original jet air threading that threads both loopers with a burst of air. It also has a needle threader that's very easy to work with. It can sew on all kinds of fabric because of the differential feed. You can even gather with it. You can instantly turn a knob and do a rolled edge, which is beautiful for napkins. It also works with a wide variety of thread. Right now, this machine is on sale. It has a regular retail price of $2,499, but we have it on sale for $1,199. But wait, we're offering a bonus for a limited time. Right now, when you purchase the Baby Lock Celebrate, you get 24 spools of Madeira Aerolock thread, plus a membership to Love of Knowledge. This is where you can get online training in all kinds of techniques on this serger, our sergers in general. If you have any questions on this or other Baby Lock models, give us a call at 1-800-865-9664 or click on the link to order your Baby Lock celebrate today. Bye for now.